got a brand new audio interface in the studio. This one's called the Audiofuse 16 rig. It's been around for a few weeks now, and I just got mine. They sent it over for me to play with and make a video. I get to keep it, but they don't have a say in what I say in this video. So I want to tell you about why I think this is fantastic for me, but I also want to make sure that you understand if this interface is right for you. Arturia makes a whole other line of audio interfaces that are perfect for beginners. This is the MiniFuse 4, and I've got a video on it. It's a fantastic interface, does a whole lot more than you would think for just a simple little audio interface. The 16 rig is really geared towards certain types of people, and I just happen to be one of those people. So what I'm going to do in this video is walk you through a basic DAW setup where you're just arming each track in your studio. You have all of your synthesizers hooked up or any other kind of devices hooked up, ready to go at any minute. We'll show you how I configured that in their software. And then I'll also talk a little bit about just running everything in your studio without a DAW open and how you can use the mixer in the Audiofuse Control Center for that, because it is brilliant. And then I'm also going to do in a future video, I'm going to show you how we could use the Audiofuse completely disconnected from a computer, because that's one of the mighty powers of it, is that you can set up all these beautiful templates on the computer with the Audiofuse Control Center, and it actually saves it on the device itself. You can take that thing, you can move it somewhere else, you can take it to a different part of your studio, take it to a completely live location, use it as a mixer. And in my studio, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook it up to an old analog 8-track that I've got sitting around just dying to be used. And so we're going to hook it up to that and use the mixer in the software to control the mix coming off the 8-track. We're going to track on the 8-track, we're going to mix on the 8-track, and even have things like reverb hooked up as a send effect without any computer. So it's going to be a really cool experiment, so make sure you stay tuned for that video as well. So without getting into the nitty-gritty details of it, because so many people have already done that, including Lou Pop, so make sure you go check out Lou Pop's video, because he goes into all of the details of the technical aspects of the audio interface. So suffice it to say, with a quick overview of the audio interface, the things that I like on the hardware side, so you can have up to 8 stereo synthesizers or devices hooked up to your studio at any time. You could have 16 mono signals coming in, of course, right? We've got some outputs right on the front, so I could hook that up to another pedal of some sort, very quickly hook it up to some piece of gear that you just brought into the studio and don't want to have wired up all the time. As you can see, I've got this Delverb by Universal Audio hooked up already, and we'll talk about how that's hooked up as a send effect. But you could have another one hooked up right on the front of the interface. So we've got 2 combo ports on the front. Those can be XLR microphone inputs, or they can be, guitar inputs, something like that. So next, to talk about the screen a little bit on this interface, and this is nice for a quick idea of signals coming in. You can see some levels, and then you could go over to, say, input number 3, and this is my MicroFreak, and I can adjust the gain on that guy just by clicking down and adjust the gain right there. I turn the pad on, make it stereo if it's a stereo, etc. But for me, this would be more if I was using it away from the computer, because the software is going to do all of that for you and much quicker. The front of the interface is giving you a nice overview, but I usually have that one set on the inputs just so I can see the levels coming in, make sure they're not clipping. Beautiful high-resolution display on this tiny little screen. Gives you tons of information. Another thing that's really nice is they put all these USB ports on it. I had one more synth I wanted to hook up here and thought, I am out of USB ports in my studio here, but I remembered I've got a hub right on the front there. So I just plugged it right in and it works perfectly. Also came with a really nice cable, I gotta say. I should remind you that there are only 2 actual preamps on this. And if you are somebody who wants to record a band, this audio interface could be brilliant, but you're going to need a whole bunch of preamps. So that's something to consider. Now, if you are recording something like a live performance, there's a good chance you have something called inserts on the back of the mixer. And so you could have 16 inserts coming out of that mixing board going into the audio interface. And I've never had an audio interface that just has 16 inputs ready to go. And now you have the ability to record a whole band. You could have, 10 mics on the drum set. And then the other 6 inputs could be for a vocal, a bass, a guitar, a keyboard, something like that, right? 16 is a lot of inputs. It covers a lot of ground when you're recording a band. So also something to keep in mind. But if you are somebody who doesn't have a whole bunch of devices to hook up to your studio, that's where this audio interface might not be for you. So that's the kind of consideration you have to make when you're looking at purchasing an audio interface. And you want to pick up something that you're not going to have to upgrade later on. And by the way, I should mention that not only do you have 16 inputs, you've also got 16 ADAT inputs and 16 ADAT outputs. So you can add that onto the interface as well. So you have just an insane amount of inputs and outputs. And in fact, I could use my old Focusrite audio interface just for the preamps and run those into the audio interface as well. So here you can see the setup I've got going on. I've got the Polybrute hooked up, audio going into the back of the Audiofuse. I've got the Sub 25, the Moog, and that one is plugged in USB and a single mono output to the audio interface. I've also got the Microfreak hooked up, USB and a single mono out. I've even got my Rhodes hooked up, so it is ready to go. All I have to do is turn it on and I can just start playing, record it into a project whenever I want. And the last thing is this newest device in the studio, the Osmose. So excited to get working with this one. We'll play around with it a tiny bit today, but I have a video coming up in the next week or two here on the Osmose because this thing is blowing my mind. Lastly, like I said, I've got the Delverb hooked up as a send effect. So I've got the output of the Delverb going to the input of the audio interface. And then I've got the input of the Delverb coming from the output of the audio interface. So one of the outputs is even hooked up to my Alesis Quadraverb because why the heck not? So all of those devices hooked up to my studio, ready to go. So let's talk a little bit about the Audiofuse Control Center, because this is the type of software that comes with almost every audio interface these days and allows you to do some complex routing, allows you to not have any DAW open, but you can go to this control center and say, turn on all of your synthesizers so you can hear them coming through the audio interface, and usually with zero latency. So what kinds of things do you get in here? Well, one thing that you must know right away is that you get this loop back capability. So you can actually take the audio and you can loop it back to any source inside your computer. And so what you could do is actually record the audio coming from your audio interface in a QuickTime video when you're doing a screen capture, just like I'm doing right now. And up till now, I have always used a program called Loopback that cost money. So I think it was over $100 to get this software, and that's how I've always recorded the audio or the system audio for my videos. So beautiful stuff. You can turn on stereo channels. That's something I couldn't do on my old audio interface. If I had, say, a synth plugged into 7 and 8, I'd have to sit there and try and dial in the perfect amount on the gain pots. So inputs, you can hit the stereo button. Outputs, you can hit the stereo button. Even on send effects, when you're working with send effects, you can just hit the stereo button, and now it's just one control for the gain for everything coming into that stereo channel. Brilliant. For this portion of the video, I am using this DAW preset that I've made, and all we're using the software for in this case is to set levels. So I can come in here and I can set the levels of each of my synthesizers. Now let's go look at the software. And I've got a little idea going on just so you can see how I've got it configured. I've got a little Microfreak thing that I've recorded. And I've got that set up so that it receives MIDI information from my controller keyboard. And then I've got an audio channel for it to come back on. You can also use something called an external instrument, which I've got set up here for the Sub 25. I've got that one set up as an external instrument here in Cubase. So if I press F4, you can see I've got that as an external instrument. That system's brilliant. I can just start recording and play it back. All this is going to be live sound coming in every time I press play. You're going to be hearing these synths creating their sounds. The next thing I've got is the Polybrute, beautiful synthesizer. And this thing I'm going to have just hardwired into my studio now. But the brilliant thing about this Polybrute is it has its own software. So I click this little virtual instrument, you can see that I've got an instrument track set up for the Polybrute. So I don't even need to touch the Polybrute over there, which is half the fun of it, really. But in terms of creating a patch, I can just open the software, I can adjust all these knobs, they're going to get saved with the project and just spit it out over to the Polybrute. Next, I've got the Osmose running the same way. And I'm so excited to make a video for this, I can't even express how much I love it. But let's now talk about the Delverb, because I also picked up that one just a couple days ago, basically for this video. And I've got that one set up as an external effect. So the Delverb is hooked up inputs and outputs to the 16 rig. So that one's hardwired in, ready to go. You can even see it in the software. Oh, by the way, I love this feature. If you just press this button, it opens up the Audiofuse control center. So you can see I've got the Delverb hooked up, 13 and 14, ready to go. And so what that means is now I can go to the audio coming from the Osmo, and I've got it hooked up to the Delverb. So if I turn that off, turn it on, and turn it up a bit more, send a little bit more of this to the Delverb. Sounds good, eh? So the Delverb, not totally sold yet because you don't get a ton of control over it. You get delay and reverb, but you're quite limited in terms of what you can do with it. It comes with an app, which also freaks me out because what happens if the app gets unsupported? But man, it sounds good. Anyways, so that's how I've got everything set up in here. And then the last thing I've got in this is a little drum beat. Okay, so polybrute thing. And then I've got a micro freak thing happening here. And let's put some Delverb on that as well. Maybe a lot. Sounds great. And then the last thing I've got is a little crate cuts beat. And that is just a drum beat coming in from battery with one of my favorite expansions, Crate Cuts. I talk about it all the time, but make sure you go check out Crate Cuts, my video on Crate Cuts if you're into that one. Okay, well, let's play a bass line. Now at this point, because it's still live, I can just go and play with the filter a little bit on this and maybe tweak the sound a little bit more. All right, you know what? I'm feeling a little saucy, so let's add another audio track and we'll make it stereo. And we're gonna call this the Rhodes. And that one's coming into the audio interface on 11 and 12. So I'm just gonna call this Rhodes. And then you'll see how we set this up from scratch. So I'm going to hit the stereo link button, turn off the pad, and crank this up. And we're probably going to start getting some noise, but that's okay. So a little out of focus, but whatever. Maybe we'll jump over to another thing, and then I'm going to jump back at the end of the video and put the Osmose in, because we'll just save the fun for the end. So the last thing to mention here is I am going to switch over to a totally different preset that I've got saved on the audio interface, and that one is this one I'm calling main. And on this one, the way I've got it set up is I've got all of my inputs here. I've got microphone input, guitar input, I've got it all named in a preset. I can just plug these in and just start playing. Microfreak's set up, ready to go. The Moog is ready to go. The Polybrute's ready to go. And of course the Osmose is set up, ready to go. What that means is in my studio, I can just instantly start playing and get creative juices flowing, right? Everything is hooked up and ready to play in real time, no latency. And the way I've got that set up is you've got your inputs on this first page. This is the configuration page, basically. And so you can see I've got all my inputs set up, stereo for all of my stereo devices and mono for my 2 mono devices. And then I've got output set up as well. So I've got the Delverb set up and the Quadraverb set up. So I can actually turn this on and I can send a signal out to the Quadraverb. So here's my sub 25. And all I need to do this is go over to the mixer page. So I go to the mixer page, my main mix, and I've got this set up and configured, which I didn't use in the other preset. I didn't have any of these things set up in the other preset when I was just using the DAW. But if you just want to play with something, all you have to do is come over to this page, hit the plus symbol, and start activating inputs for your different signals. So you can see I've got 4 monos, and then the rest are all stereo. And then you can see I've got these auxiliary 1 and 2. And if I go to my routing page, you guys can steal this setup if you have this device. You can see I've got my auxiliary 1, 2, and 3 and 4 are set up for the Delverb, and this is set up for the Quadraverb. So this is where you would go change that in the routing matrix. And then you've also got this QMix page where you could create totally different mixes for a headphone mix for somebody if you had really complex recordings setup going on. And then if I go over to my sub 25, I can also turn up auxiliary 3 and 4 and send it to my Quadraverb. There's so much you can do with this audio interface. And talking to the designer of it, one of the things he said is that he is just blown away by the configurations that people are doing that they never even imagined. So let me know if there are certain things you want to see on this, because I know for me, it took a lot of digging and a lot of prep for this video. And for me, what it's going to mean is I'm going to use my hardware synthesizers a lot more. And the thing I always say about hardware is you don't need it, but when you have that tactile, physical thing, something else happens. So it's not necessarily the sound of these instruments, but maybe it's just more the user experience. Anyways, having so much fun with this, and I'm really looking forward to incorporating all of these synthesizers more often into my compositions. So now let's head back and play a little lead line and get this video over with, because it's way longer than I ever thought this video would be. Just going to play out with the Osmose. So thanks so much for watching the video. You've got to check out this audio interface. For my setup, I can't think of a better audio interface. And if you have any questions about it, hit me up in the comments. But, let me know what you think about it. Thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.